Welcome once again to Short Story Theatre. Today's story by Bill Russo takes you to the streets of the city of Boston. The show is free to listen to, but please have a quarter handy. You're going to need that 25 cents later on, as you'll find out in a few minutes. Bill says that although this story is part fiction, the greater part of it is true. I'll leave it to you to sort out which is which. Now, here's Matthew with, In Boston, It's 25 Cents.
I'm a Boston guy. I've been to New York. I've spent a winter or two in Florida. I've even been to California, but I couldn't stay there very long. It's too far from the ocean. I guess I'll always be a Boston guy. I've been here a long time. Let me tell you about my city now and back in the day. At the corner of Broadway and D Streets in South Boston right now, there is a Burger King and also McDonald's. They have pretty good food and it's not very expensive. I don't think Stanley Blinstrub would be too upset if he knew that two fast food franchises have taken over his spot. After all, when he opened his restaurant on that very same corner in the 1920s, he offered pretty good food, fast and cheap. A sandwich was 5 cents and a dinner was 2 bits, 25 cents. Stanley was barely 20 when he realized that success in his father's real estate business was not making him happy. He saw a shuttered restaurant in Southie, and immediately decided that he would reopen the building. That night, at home in the Brighton section of Boston, he made his case to his family. He told them of his plan, and asked them to help him. His mom was reluctant, but Stanley kept pushing and ultimately called for a family vote. He won, and the family gave him the financial backing to start his venture. The restaurant grew, and sprouted a 350-seat nightclub next door. Soon there was a cafeteria and cocktail lounge at the D Street entrance. Townies could get a meal and a drink for a decent price. On the Broadway side, the restaurant had morphed into Blinstrub's Village, one of America's largest and finest nightclubs. There was seating for almost 2,000 dinner guests, and a stage that held only the top entertainers of the day. Blinstrub's became a destination, not only for the 8 million people within a few hours' drive, but also for people from all over the country. This was the era of glittering night spots. New York had the Copa, and the Latin Quarter, and Boston had Blinstrub's Village. Jimmy Durante considered Blinstrub's his home away from home. Tony Bennett, Frank Sinatra, Patti Page, Johnny Mathis, and Robert Goulet were regulars. Johnny Mathis sold out 2 shows a night for 2 weeks, and was so popular that 160,000 people had to be turned away. The top entertainers commanded up to $20,000 a week. And the pay was in cash. At the end of the night, the entertainer would follow Stanley into his office where Blinstrub would count out the performers' wages from the daily receipts, and then hand the star a stack of 5s, 10s, and 20s that added up to as much as $4,000 for one night's work. The shows consisted of the featured entertainer, as well as a chorus line of 8 girls, and the Blinstrub's house band. When the star attraction was a comedian or other non-musical act, director Mike Gaillard's job was easy. But when a big-name singer was booked, things got tough. The talent would specify how many pieces were needed for their orchestra, and would also often require unusual instruments such as a harp. Mike only had 8 regular men in the group, and when he needed more players, he would have to supplement with extra members from the Boston Musicians' local union. And these New England guys had to sound just as good as New York or Los Angeles people. One guy, who loved the house band, was Sammy Davis Jr. Immensely talented, Sam always did well in Boston. One night after the second show, he grabbed bandleader Mike Gaillard and told him, "You cats were great tonight. Really solid. It's on me, I want to take the whole band out for dinner." Sam darted out to Broadway and hailed a bunch of cabs. 16 bandsmen flooded out of the club and piled into the checker cabs. In the lead cab were Sammy Davis Jr., the bandleader, and the sax and trumpet men. "Where to, Mr. Davis?" asked the driver, who recognized Sam, probably by the eye patch he was wearing at the time, and perhaps because of his tuxedo and the pickup at the nightclub. "To Roxbury," Sam replied. Roxbury was, and still is, a predominantly African-American neighborhood of Boston. It was, and is, home to some of the best ribs in the world. And that's where Sam took the band that night, to a Roxbury rib joint. Ribs, drinks, and a good time were had by all. Sammy Davis Jr. was loved and respected by the band, but his pal Frank Sinatra could be a bit of a problem, especially concerning the trombone. By the 1960s, Sinatra had worked with Billy May, Nelson Riddle, and Count Basie. Heavyweights all. Before them, Frank had cut his musical teeth with the great trombone player and leader, Tommy Dorsey. In fact, Frank learned his amazing phrasing and breath control by copying Dorsey's trombone style. Tommy developed a way of playing, while breathing from the corners of his mouth. It gave the appearance of continuous play, without ever having to take a breath. When Frank was booked into the club, he sent instructions to Mike Gaylord that called for a 20-piece orchestra with strings, and an especially good trombone player. Tony Bennett was headlining the day that Sinatra's request reached Blindstrub's village. When he heard of the dilemma, Tony told the band leader about a trombonist he had met during the summer, in a club on Main Street in Hyannis on Cape Cod. Johnny Havlicek, star of the Boston Celtics, and a bunch of Kennedys, were among the crowd at the club at the edge of downtown. Players that night included Dick Johnson on clarinet, he was running Artie Shaw's orchestra at the time, as well as piano great Dave McKenna, and fabulous one-handed trumpeter Lou Colombo. The trombone player was Cass Boot. Tony Bennett arrived at the club, after his gig at the Cape Cod Melody Tent. At midnight, the doors to the Hyannis Club were closed to the public, and a select crowd was treated to a jam session that lasted until after 4 a.m. That trombone player was fantastic. He was as good as Jack Teagarden. You should get him to do the Sinatra gig at Blindstrub's, Tony advised the band leader. Armed with the player's name and address, Mike Gaylord drove 7 miles from Boston to Lynn, an old industrial city of 104,000 people. Due to the toughness of the town and the high crime rate, New Englanders coined this taunting rhyme. Lynn, Lynn, city of sin. You never come out the way you go in. Ask for water, they give you gin. The girls say no, but they always give in. There's a huge General Electric plant in the city that has 3,000 employees as of 2020, but probably had twice that number back in the 1960s when Mike Gaylord was searching for his trombone player. He found Cass Boot by the side of a spinning lathe, working on a jet engine design. Cass Boot loved his job in the GE plant. He had many offers to be a full-time musician, but liked his job too much and did not take to the idea of having to leave his wife and kids for long periods while on the road. But he did like the idea of playing at Blindstrub's, and signed on right away. He played beautifully during the Sinatra booking, and Frank even took a special liking to Cass Boot, singling him out on stage for his excellent solo work. After Sinatra's engagement, Boot went back to his job at GE and Norm Crosby came into the club for 2 weeks. Norm is a Boston comic who hit the big time in a 3-year tour with Robert Goulet. After the Goulet period, Norm went on his own and was very successful. He packed Blindstrub's and as a bonus, met and fell in love with one of the chorus girls, Joni Crane Foley. She left a job as a rockette in New York City to come to Blindstrub's. They have been married almost 50 years. Norm is known as the master of malaprops. He opened a show with lines like, "I speak to you tonight from my diagram and I want to tell you that I never get nervous on the Blindstrub's stage because I drink decapitated coffee." Midway through the Crosby engagement, potential disaster struck again for Mike Gaylord and his Blindstrub's house band. Judy Garland was scheduled to follow Crosby for a 2-week stint. "You can't use Cass Boot as your trombone player for my wife," said Sid Luft, who was not only Judy Garland's husband, but also her very successful manager. He had guided her back to the top, after a disastrous period during the 1950s. "Why can't I use him? Boot is one of the best in the country. If he's good enough for Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Nat King Cole, and Bob Goulet, I think he's good enough for Judy Garland. Goodness has nothing to do with it." Luft said, "You can't use him because he is bald. He is as bald as a cue ball and Judy will not let a bald man in the band. If she sees this guy, she will go nuts. She will lose it. The whole engagement could go south. Get somebody else." Opening night came, and Mike Gaylord set up his band, with one slight alteration. He had the drums out front and put the entire brass section in the back row. He did this, because he kept Cass Boot in the band, and he figured if Cass was in the back, Garland would not see him. The club was crammed full at showtime and 60,000 people had to be turned away. The entire 2 weeks were totally sold out. Judy Garland was spectacular. She opened with Get Happy, and then went right into her award-winning version of The Man That Got Away, from her Academy Award-nominated performance in 1954's A Star Is Born. When she did Somewhere Over the Rainbow, the entire audience did not take a breath for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. She wrung every note out of Old Man River, with the power of the great concert artist, Paul Robeson. The Blindstrub's house band was crisp, flawless and powerful. But Gaylord was still worried that Garland would see his bald trombone player. While conducting the group, he kept trying to move his body between her eyesight and Cass Boot. Sid Luft was petrified lest his wife should discover the ruse, and blame it on him. To thunderous applause, Garland closed the show with the trolley song. For an encore, She spoke to the audience about the people who inspired her. She talked to Frank Sinatra, and pointed out to the group that they both recorded for the same label, Capitol Records. Then she told the boys to do "I'll Never Smile Again," which was the biggest hit for the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra with Sinatra as the vocalist. I don't know if you ever heard "I'll Never Smile Again," but the song is almost a duet between the voice and the trombone, and the trombone player is supposed to take a spotlight when he does the solo. Luft and Gaylord were frantically waving their arms at Cass Boot, signaling him to stay in his seat and not stand up, but meanwhile Judy Garland was motioning to him to stand up. Luckily, the bell of the horn was hiding his chrome dome from her view. Just when it looked like Cass Boot was going to stand up and get in the spotlight, Sid Luft sent two stagehands to forcibly hold him down while he played the solo parts. Garland never missed a beat, and wrapped up the show to a standing ovation. Shaking like a motor with a broken valve, Sid Luft was backstage with his wife when she told him, "I want to talk about the band. Bring that band leader in here to see me." The band leader, Mike Gaylord, stepped into Miss Garland's dressing room like a prisoner on the walk to the gallows, and hung his head just as low. He waited in fear as Lady Garland spoke. She said, "I want to compliment the band, tell the boys they did a great job. But for tonight's second show, why don't you put the drums in the back and the brass in front?" Gaylord's heart stopped. He choked on his words, and gurgles came out instead of words. Judy Garland continued, "I spoke with Frank Sinatra a few weeks ago at Capitol Records in LA. He told me about your trombone player. He said he's great. Frank also told me he's bald, and he said get over it. So for the rest of the engagement, I want the bald guy in the front row, where I can hear him better. I just won't look at him." The engagement ended with rave reviews and blockbuster attendances. Garland thanked all the band members, even Cass Boot. As for the 60,000 people that had to be turned away during her engagement at Blint Strub's, they got a pleasant surprise when Judy Garland announced that she was going to do a free outdoor show. She kept her word. It was held in August on the Boston Common, and was attended by over 100,000 people, and yes, she had her favorite bald trombone player with her, and her husband too. But that didn't last long. The end for Luft came later that summer, and Judy moved on to another husband. She had 5 or 6 before she died. The end, for Blint Strub's Village, came just about the same time as the ending of Garland and Luft. In the middle of the night on February 7, 1968, a fire broke out, and engulfed and destroyed Boston's biggest and best club. Owner Stanley Blint Strub had no insurance on the property. "I had a 24-hour fire watch team, that's why I had no insurance," he said. Damage was over $1.25 million. Blint Strub's pal, Archbishop Richard Cushing of Boston, called him the morning after the fire. "I've got $100,000 to help you out," said the leader of Boston's Catholic community. "And I am going to organize a fundraiser." He did, and it was a 4.5-hour show at Boston Garden, with dozens of the nation's top stars. They raised another $150,000. But this was far short of the amount needed, and Blint Strub was 71 years old. Back in 1929, he lost everything in the stock market crash and rebuilt his empire in less than 3 years. But he was barely in his 30s then, and rebuilding was a delightful challenge. In the end, America's Smartest Supper Club became a memory. The remains of the massive brick structure were torn down, and ultimately replaced by that Burger King and the McDonald's that I told you about a few minutes ago. Looking at the site now, it looks small. How did one of the biggest clubs in the world ever fit into that little space? It did. But it is no more. Blint Strub's is gone. The stars are gone. But South Boston, or Southie as we call it, is still here. D Street is still here, and so is Broadway. You can get a burger for $1, and for another $1 you can add fries. There's no entertainment with the food, but if you walk outside on D Street, you might see the Boston cinema crew, making a movie. You might spot Ben, or Casey Affleck. Maybe Matt Damon, or Mark Wahlberg. You might get to see the real-life fighter, Mickey Ward, or his brother Dickie Eklund. Or you might see a longtime Southie regular, Bobby Quarters. That's not his real name, but it's what people call him, because he walks up and down D Street, asking for quarters. Bobby Quarters is also known as Bobby No-No, that's because you have to give him a quarter. If you offer anything less or anything more, you will hear, "No, no, no, no. It has to be a quarter."
Yes friends, it has to be a quarter. This is a 2-bit story. So put that dollar bill back in your pocket, for, as I told you in the beginning, in Boston, it's 25 cents. And so closes another episode of Short Story Theater. I hope that you have enjoyed the program, and if so, please like it, subscribe, and tell somebody else about our little theater. Oh, I almost forgot. Most important of all, please come back again real soon. Won't you?